Hello, and welcome back to another exciting ZenCircle webinar sponsored by Zensible. I'm Veda, a fellow learner like all of you. Today, I'm hoping to learn how to build a strong connection with my clients from the very first mental well-being session. What questions should I ask them? What should I not ask? How should my room look like? What accessories should I have in my room? And can I build the same sort of connection with them in online sessions? I only have questions and questions and questions. To give us the answers, we have Delphina Esther with us. Delphina has been a school counselor for over 6 years, and then she's been working for over 5 years at Heart It Out as a counseling psychologist. She is also the head of learning at Heart It Out. She has taught hundreds of new counselors like me and you on the right way to build trust with their clients. I'm so excited to have her with us. Welcome, and thank you, Del, for being here.
Hello, and thank you for having me. It feels great to be doing this, even if it's online. It feels great.
Hey, that is the new normal, you know,
That is true.
online, offline. I mean, so many people have joined only because it's online. If it has been offline, then it takes a lot more, things that we need to keep track of
Absolutely.
and traffic. So this works.
Yeah.
And Delph, you have had, conversations with hundreds of clients. And in fact, you've had one client who has had hundreds of sessions with you. So but when a client comes to a session, especially their very first session, they come into it with this expectation that everything is going to change right after that one conversation. And they have really unrealistic expectation about what they can expect from the first session and from their therapist. So how do you manage these expectations right from the very beginning? What do you do?
It really depends because when people come in for their first session, I think I usually let them talk about whatever their pressing concern is, at least for the first half of the session, where we are understanding why they've come into session. And when they tell me what their concerns are, usually those concerns have been there for a while, even if it's a week or a month or a few months. But now they have decided to come to therapy. So obviously something has changed or their tolerance level has been reached, right? So I try to understand that. And it really depends on whether it's their first session at all or whether it's their first session with me. So sometimes if they've had previous experience with therapy, then they come with the expectation of knowing that this is going to take some time and it's not a quick fix. And they need to be available, they need to be present. And they also know that a lot of the onus is on them. But sometimes when it is their first session, first ever session, then that is an expectation setting that I do. I sort of do a lot of psychoeducation. I tell them about the aspects of therapy that they should know, confidentiality, emergencies. I tell them how it is a joint venture and I'm not going to be able to solve all of their problems. They're going to have to be the ones to do it and all of that. And I think that first session can be a huge deciding factor. For some people, it's very enlightening, and then they're like, okay, I'll think about it and come back. And then they come back, and then they do a lot of sessions to reach the goals that they've set. But for some people, it can be very daunting. So, which is why some clients don't come back. So that is something that we have to really work with. And that is a very sadly reality of being a therapist. So we do what we can do.
Yeah, that is very true. That for some people it can be very overwhelming. In social media, I had a connection of a connection of a connection. They had posted about their first therapy session, right? It was their first ever therapy session. And they wrote that I did not have a good experience at all. The therapist did not understand what I wanted to do, and they kept asking details about my family and who's there with me in the house. I know that as a psychology student that we are trying to establish the genogram, but how do you explain it to a client? Do you explain it to a client, especially if it is their first ever therapy session, that I'm going to be asking a lot about your family and not a lot about your actual situation? And please don't get worried about it. What sort of scene do you set specifically around how much questions you're going to be asking about them?
Um, Again, I think this is subjective from full-time practitioners to students, because when students do sessions, they have a certain requirement of the things that they need to get from the client. Like they need to get a genogram, they need to get goals, they need to get their family history, they need to get like case history and everything else. And it needs to happen in the order of the sessions that the college or that their system has prescribed. And I know this because when I was studying in Christ, I also had to do this. Like in 4 sessions, we had to get full case history, we had to get their goals, we had to have a prognosis, and all of that. And it was something that I really struggled with then as a therapist. One, because it was something I was still learning. And two, because you really can't have the same timeline for all clients. You can put a timeline, but it is going to be very varied from client to client. But I also understand that education system has a long way to go and we're very far away from there. But as a practitioner, as a full-time practitioner, I also am a lot more flexible with the direction that I go in. Like if a client is coming to me after they've had a breakup, or if they're coming to me because they've had a panic attack, something that's immediately happened and they want to process it, I don't think it's appropriate to be like, okay, I understand you're going through something, but I have all of these questions that you need to answer. Because then they're going to not feel heard and they're not going to feel validated and they're not going to feel like whatever they're trying to say is getting through. So, what I do, and what I think what a lot of my colleagues also do, is that we address whatever their concern is immediately and then sort of work to the issues that they have later. And sometimes I also tell them that, hey, I see that these are other concerns that are present, but if and when you want to address them, or if I feel that they're becoming more predominant and they're impacting your quality of life right now, then we'll address them. But if not, I'm just bringing it to your attention. And there have been times when we've not addressed it. We've just addressed their initial concern and then they've left. So it's up to them.
Oh my God, as a student, I'm just like, my mind is blown that why we start working on a client without their genogram and taking their case history. Unthinkable. See, but this is the kind of practical things that we need to take care of, right? So first address the concern, and then you can talk about other additional, just keep getting small details here and there, small details, start creating that picture in your own mind rather
Absolutely.
than overwhelming the client with all of these questions straight away when they are coming to you for a specific thing.
Absolutely.
So does this...
And these are things that you can keep adding to your file, to the notes that you have about the client over a period of time. I think the struggle as a student is that you have to do it in 4 weeks or you have to do it in 6 weeks. But as a practitioner and as with clients who are coming back, you have a lot of time to do it. So you might get some information for the genogram today. You might get some information for the genogram like 2 weeks from now. And then you might recognize that there's enmeshment somewhere else. Then you might recognize that there has been a death somewhere else. And you might not get all of this information at once, which I think is the expectation that is set by school or college.
Yeah.
But in reality, it really doesn't work like that.
Yeah, reality is so much different. Do you change how you approach this, especially in the first session, depending on what their presenting concerns are? For example, do you do or ask different questions if they come with anxiety or depression, or do you ask them different questions if it is much more clinical, like OCD or childhood trauma, etc.? And if a client does not fill the intake form, which we keep asking them to fill, how do you prepare yourself for the first session? It's like completely, you're talking to somebody, but you have no idea what their situation is. And how do you, seat of the pants discussion, how do you have them?
I mean, for the longest time, it's only now that I occasionally check the intake form. But if it's a first session, I usually go in blind
Why?
because I feel like the intake form can make you very biased. It can already give you a set of ideas or assumptions about the client and what they're coming in with.
Mm,
But when they come into session, their concern or who they are as a person might be completely different.
mm, mm,
So I prefer to do my first session with zero information. And it's only for my second or third session that I go back to the intake form. And that's only if I haven't gotten the information that they would put in the intake form. But otherwise, most often I go in blind.
Okay. Do you tell them that? Because if you are working in an organization like Heart It Out, right? Then you will actually have the intake form. Somebody would follow up with them to say, hey, you're coming in for your session, fill in the intake form. And then they come to the session and you're asking similar questions, and that might throw them off a little bit. So do you tell them beforehand, hey, I know you have filled in your intake form, but I want this information from you?
No, no. I mean, the information that I get from them in session is very organic.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes up in conversation. Like in the intake form, we ask about their family, we ask about their job, we ask about their drinking, smoking, any other habits that they might have. And it comes up organically. As in, I went out with my friends and we all were drinking. And in my head, I'm like, oh, okay, so you drink. So then if that becomes a problem, then I'm following up with, oh, how often do you do this? And then they tell me every weekend or every other day or every Friday, I'm out with my friends, and then it's impacting other things in my life. So I'm noting it for myself that, oh, this is a concern that I need to circle back to. But in the first session, it's a lot of free flow.
Yeah.
Of course, I ask them, who are there in your family? Do you live with them? Do you live alone? These are general stuff that I ask them. And they also don't mind telling them. And if they filled it in the intake form, they also say, as I've said in the intake form, again, they will reiterate it, and it's okay. Like I've never had the experience of someone saying, why have you not read my intake form? Because most often they're coming looking to be heard and looking to find a solution.
Yeah. You
So
have not had me as your client. I think I hope. But yeah, I get that. I get why you want to, kind of go and get all this information from them, because that's going to be much more first-hand
yes.
information, right? Yeah. So it's almost 15 minutes into the session. I just want to take a quick minute to tell others that hey, if you have questions, feel free to drop it. Some of you are already adding your questions into the chat box, which is great. At the end of the session, we'll have 10 minutes where you can raise your hand and ask questions. So you can keep your questions until then as well. Okay. But I had a question, a person asked a question, so I'm going to start with that. Right. So we are doing this session online. So it pertains to this. When you are actually in an online session, we both have our videos on, but a lot of our listeners don't have their videos on. But as a client, if they choose not to have their video on, right, you want to respect their choice. But at the same time, as a therapist, how do you build, you take a lot of visual cues from what you see. How do you build that trust, and how do you understand what the client is going through if they don't have their video on in an online session?
I mean, it's something that I offer to them. I tell them that, hey, it would be great if you could turn your video on. But sometimes people choose to not have their videos on. So there are a few clients that we've never seen each other in all of the sessions we've had. Like I've had some of them I'm working with for a couple of months, even a year maybe, and I've never seen them. They've probably seen me because they book session and they get to see my face. But I have never seen them. I've only heard their voice, and even their photo on Google is a random photo or just their initial. But it has worked out because something that I have learned is that rapport building is aided by visual cues. It is not based on visual cues. Right? Like, sure, if you can see them and you can get their expression and get what is going on for them visually, it's good. It's an added factor, but it is not the only factor. So they're going to tell you what's going on, and you're going to be able to hear their voice, and you're going to be able to listen to them pause. You're going to be able to listen to them take a deep breath before they tell you something that's world shattering for them. So those are cues that you're going to have to tune in a lot more. And if you don't understand, or if you're not understanding the depth of what is going on for them, you can always question them. You can always be like, can you tell me more? Can you help me understand? Can you explain this to me? And they're more than willing to, because they also understand that their videos are not on and there is something that is missing. But they're a lot more willing to talk about it. And I've also noticed that, and the reason I don't force clients to keep the videos on is something that I learned very early, I think during COVID, is that clients who have been comfortable talking without their video and they're very chatty and they talk and they give you all the information, the minute I've told them, no, I need to see you, need you to turn your video on, all the talking stops. Because then they're very conscious. Because then they're like, oh no, I can see myself. Oh no, you can see me. So after a couple of experiences like this, I'm like, it's fine. I'd rather take all the talking without the video than have the video on and not have any conversation. So
that is a good point about what you said, that sometimes clients may not be very talkative in certain situations. When they are coming in for the very first time, they don't know you. Okay, either it's their very first session with a counselor ever, or first session with you. And some clients, chatty clients like me, they will just tell you their life history. But some clients, they are very, very reticent. They have taken the first step to talk to someone, but they are still not okay to open up. How do you make them open up in those situations?
So I talk to them about other things, right? Like, let's say they've come to session, but they're like, I don't know what to talk about. That's when I ask them all of the other questions. That's when case history happens. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about who's at home. Tell me if you're working. Tell me about that. If you're studying, tell me about that. Who are your friends? What do you do when you have free time? What are your hobbies? So when clients are resistant is when case history comes into play, because they're not talking. So when I ask them questions, and these are open-ended questions, there are a lot more, because it also gives them direction in which direction to go. Sometimes they also are like, there's so much that's happening that I don't know what to talk about. So then we talk about, okay, what is the most recent thing that's happened? And then we work, and then they really realize, actually, no, if I tell you this, you won't understand. I'll tell you from the beginning. I'm like, okay, tell me from the beginning. So it varies. So, but which is why doing case history and genogram and all that is important. But like I said, you can't do it for all the clients. You can't do it every time. But it is a very, very useful tool to help them start talking.
Yeah, I mean, you need to figure out what is working with the client.
Yes.
And that is one of the best way to establish trust is you figure out and you change your approach based on, what is going on.
Yeah.
So, Delph, I know you have a little bit of cough, and thank you so much. In spite of the cough, you're doing the webinar with us. So I asked you this question before we started the webinar, and for the sake of everybody else, I'm going to ask it again. When you are a little unwell, whether it is an offline session or an online session, how do you make your clients feel comfortable, because you may not be able to talk as much because of your voice? How do you explain it to them, and how do clients react to that?
Uh, I mean, I'm glad you asked me this because last week when I was sick, I saw one of my clients that I've been seeing for a while, and they were very concerned. They were like, "Oh my God, are you okay? Like, have you been, drinking hot water? Have you been having like lemon and ginger and everything else that works?" And they were very concerned. And at some point, they were like, "It's okay. You rest your voice. You don't talk. I will do all the talking because I have so much to tell you. So you can just respond in bits when you need to." So I was like, okay. But I've also had new clients who've come in, and for them, I've been a lot more reassuring. And I'm like, I'm really sorry because I might be coughing a lot, but I'm still listening to you, and don't worry about it. And if it gets too much, you let me know. But most often, clients are very absorbed with their own story and their own experience that you're just witnessing them.
Mm.
So if you're mindful enough to sort of address it, then it shouldn't be a problem. Unless you're like horribly sick. Like I remember, like I had fever and all of that, and then I told my clients I'm not going to do offline because the flu was going around, and I'm like, I don't want to do offline sessions and get everybody sick. So then everybody agreed to switch to online. Some of them said, no, I'll move it to another week when you're able to come offline. So changes like this. But I think as long as you're able to communicate and let them know what is going on, clients are very understanding.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch to some of the audience questions again. In some of your first sessions with a few first clients, what were some of the mistakes that you made that you taught you some important lessons? Share your experiences so that we will either not try to make the same mistakes, or if we do, then we'll say, oh, even the great elf did it, so that's fine.
I think one mistake that stands out to me and something that I recall is I remember when I was working, this is when I was working in school. I had just finished masters and I joined as a school counselor. So I was baby therapist at that point of time. So I remember it was my third or fourth client, and they came and they were telling me about everything that was going on at home and how they were not able to study and all of that. And because it was a lot of information, like there was a lot of violence and there was verbal abuse and physical abuse, and there was no supervisor in the school that I was working at, so I had to figure it out myself. So in the knowledge that I had at that point of time, I went to the senior teacher who was available and I told them about this. And I said, and because they had also mentioned to me that the student was not doing well in their studies and other things. So I thought I'll let them know that there are a lot of other things that are happening in this kid's life. So maybe we need to offer them extra support, and we need to help them find other ways to do better. So my idea was that this would be addressed at school from the teachers, and like maybe they'd give them a study buddy or something like that, and we'd figure it out. But the teacher also was very enthusiastic about this and decided to call in the parents. And the parents came to school and they had no idea what had happened, and they didn't know that their child was talking to the school counselor. And so the parents came and the teacher called me, and then I didn't know that the parents were coming. So everybody was very unprepared for this, except maybe the teacher. But I don't think the teacher was ready for what was going to happen, because the parents came in and the teacher said, your child has told the counselor that you all have been fighting and she's very scared about it and it's upsetting her. And so she's not studying. And you're, putting a lot of pressure on her to study, which is not fair for the student. So I really think you both need to go for therapy, which in hindsight was not a bad idea. I mean, she was coming from a very, very good place that, like if you got help and figured out your own problems, it would really benefit the child. But one, I was not equipped for this. And two, the parents were very defensive. They were like, how dare you? How dare you comment on our parenting skills and whatever we're doing? And sure, we might have our own problems, but we are not, putting it on the child and all of that. And thankfully, the child was not present. But then when I met the child, like a week later or 2 weeks later, then they were like, and in school, they don't call you by name or they don't call you the counselor, they call you ma'am. So the child was like, ma'am, I don't even know what happened. But after that, they yelled at me the first 2 days because I was not supposed to talk to you. And then they've told me that whatever problem I have, I should tell them and not you. And I was like, okay. So then we sort of figured it out. And then from then was when I learned that even if I am going to tell teachers, I need to tell the teachers what to do rather than wait for them to figure it out. But thankfully, the student and I had a great rapport. And this happened when they were in 8th grade or something, but we still continue to talk and meet till they finished and graduated 10th grade. So that had a happy ending, but that was quite scary. And that was a huge lesson for me. I was like, my gosh, never again.
That is
Yeah.
a very good information. You may be coming from your heart may be coming from the right place, but you cannot. There are repercussions that you need to handle. So thankfully, in this case, the child was able to still come to you and talk to you. But in case there are any broken trust like that, how can we rebuild the trust with the client? What would you do? It may be the same situation. It can be some other situation. It can be something like you taught them a technique that did not work and the client is now very upset. Actually, this was one of the questions that I got from the participants offline is they keep coming back to you with the same concern. And at some point, you're also frustrated. They are also frustrated because something is not working. What do you do in those sort of situation?
This is something that I'm saying after so many years of experience, but I think in those moments when it's happened, it has been very frustrating and disappointing. And it's made me question my own skills as a therapist because why are they not getting better if I'm a good therapist? But something else that I've also realized over the years is that we are a very fractional part of their life. Any client, adolescent, adult, child, whatever, we're a very fractional part of their life. And sure, it does go a long way, the work that we do. But they have so much of life happening for them and to them outside of therapy, right? So there are a lot of other factors we need to consider. So if something is not working and it's not working in therapy, then we also need to look at, okay, what is the environment that they're in? Are they able to apply this? Like sometimes we talk about journaling as a very important part of therapy, right? But in some homes, kids can't journal because there's no privacy. Parents are going to go through their journal, and whatever is read is going to be used against them, or they're going to be yelled at, or it's going to be taken away, it's going to be thrown. So things like that. So in that time, journaling is not the first line of homework that you're going to give them. It's going to be other things. It's going to be is it going to be able to join some activity? Are you going to be able to be part of something else? Is there some other outlet to this where you can do this more often? And then eventually figure it out. Of course, now it's online. So a lot of times I tell them to journal on their phones. I tell them to journal on a Google document so parents are not checking that. Things like that. But you really need to adapt to the client situation.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
So
So since we are talking about children and adolescents who have influences from their parents, there is a question related to that from the audience. So I want to switch to that. They
Mhm.
have asked, how do we deal with moody teenagers who refuse to talk as they have been compelled to come for counseling either by their parents or teachers. So what do? They are like, I'm forced to be here. I'm just going to sit and stare at you until you just, drop it. So what do you do in those situations?
I mean, honestly, I love working with teenagers. They're my favorite age group to work with. And I think working in a school, I loved being able to interact with so many of them. And I think that's the one thing that I miss the most about not working in a school, that I don't get to see kids and teenagers as often as I'd like to. But I think when they're moody and they don't want to talk, and of course that happens when they're forced to come to therapy, they're forced to go and talk to somebody, then they're seeing it as a punishment, right?
Mhm.
So they're seeing it as something that they're punished for something that they did. Like even in school, like they're talking in class, they bunked class, they'd be like, go to the counselor. I'm like, first of all, this is not a punishment. Like, so stop treating it like that. So, and obviously I'm not going to tell that teenager that, because they're going to be like, whatever. But something that I did as part of, making it more fun is I made my space a lot more welcoming. So there were like comic books, there were novels, and there were other things for them to do. And they didn't have to come and talk to me. So I'd be like, sure, you can come and sit here for an hour if your teacher expects you to, but you don't have to talk to me. You can sit and do other things. You can do your homework, you can finish your notes, you can do whatever. And because they realized that I wasn't forcing them to do something, they'd show up more frequently. And then I talk to them, and then they'd tell me other things. And then they'd not tell me the things that the adults expect them to tell me, right? Like for example, um, I had a child sent to me because they were not doing well in their exams. They were like, go to the counselor. But we didn't talk about exams at all. We spoke about the relationship that they were having. We spoke about how parents are going through a divorce. We spoke about how there are issues in the friend circle. And we spoke about all of those other things. And because finally they had space to talk about these other things and process it and learn coping mechanisms that would help them, the studies eventually got better. But I don't ever remember in session talking about, oh, you need to study more and you need to have a schedule. No. Like there were so many other things that were going on in their life, and studies was not even on the top three. So really learn to talk about what they wanted, especially with adolescents, especially with teenagers. Let them lead session. Let them take you where they want to take you, because they will tell you. And their lives are so interesting. And of course, as an adult, now I'm just like, this is not even like in the grand scheme of things, this is not even going to matter in like 2 years. But for them, it's life changing. And so you need to show up in that moment for them. And something that I used to also have group classes with them where I used to teach them like life skills and all of that. And something that I would always tell them is that as adolescents, there is nothing average for you, right? Like everything is extreme. You're either extremely happy, or you're extremely sad, or you're extremely in love, or you extremely hate somebody. There is no balance. But eventually life will balance out. But right now, you're not going to be able to find the balance, and don't try to. We're just going to try to learn to how to back away from the extreme. That's the minimum that we're going to do. And I think that helps because one, they're not aware. Two, they have no control. And three, everybody's trying to make them fit into a mold. So I think when you just allow them to be, they're a lot more open, I guess. So as you can see, I love working with them.
That is good. Just let them lead you into the conversation.
Yes.
Don't worry about what they are supposed to be talking. Just let them lead into the conversation. That's a good tactic. Except when the parent or the teacher who force them to come to you and talk to you, they come and then they say, so what did they say? What did they say? Did you tell them that they need to do this? They have the good intentions at heart, but this is what happens, especially when the children are forced to come to therapy. How do you handle them? How do you because they may, if they don't like the responses you're giving them, they may say, okay, this is not working out. Let's not even go to the counselor. You have already established that rapport with them by letting them lead you into conversation. And now whoever is, sending them to you for sessions no longer wants them to come for session. What do you do then?
So there are a couple of things that I do to address this. One, I let the parent know in advance that the sessions are confidential. I let them know that, sure, it's great that you brought your child in for therapy, but whatever happens in therapy is between me and the client. If the client wants to tell you something, sure, go ahead. If the client is telling you, I have no problem whatsoever, but I am not going to tell you this, right? I can give you highlights of the session, but nothing more than that. That is something that I lay out for the parents in advance. And something that I do with clients is I tell them that the people that have gotten you for therapy, whether it's a teacher or whether it's a parent, is expecting me to sort of give them a report. So I need to tell them something about session. What are you okay with me telling them?
Okay.
So then we have a discussion about it, as in, okay. And it also depends on what is the concern that they've been brought in with. Like, have they harmed themselves? Are they doing drugs? And is that why they've come in? So if these are immediate concerns, then obviously I can't be like, oh no, I'm not telling you anything. Right? There has to be some communication. So then I tell them, okay, so this is something that they really worry about. And what about this can I tell them? And I also let the client know that just because there is confidentiality, they're not going to be able to get away with everything. Because in case of an emergency, in case there is something that I need the other person to be aware of, like in case they're still self-harming, then I need to know that there is an adult who's aware, who can monitor them, who can be present. So I need to keep them in the loop. So I tell them these things. And of course, the client is going to be resistant, like, no, you can't tell them this, you can't tell them that. I'm like, so then we bargain, we communicate, and we reach some sort of middle ground that the client is okay with me telling some things to them. But I also get to tell them the important things that I need to tell them. So there is some sort of middle ground that we reach. And then hopefully that works. Sometimes parents want more information, it doesn't work. Sometimes clients want us to give no information, that doesn't work. It's a work in progress. But I've also had it happen that when we don't give information to parents and they wanted to pull back the client from therapy, clients have been very insistent that, no, I want to go back to therapy. And they have gotten their parents to send them back to therapy. So if they see value and if you've built enough rapport and if they are in a healthy enough space where it is possible, they are going to come back. Yeah. I've had students come back to me after they left school, I left school. Then they found me and then they said, I couldn't come to therapy that time because my parents wouldn't be okay with it. But now I have a job or now I'm in college and I can afford to do this. And they've come back. And it's what, 3, 4, 5 years back. So in my head, I'm like, that's a long time. You probably wouldn't even remember me, but turns out they do. So we don't know when it's going to start working. You just need to make sure that you put in the work so that eventually you see what is going to happen.
Okay. I was going to pivot to a different question, but I've just seen a question pop up and it's just too good to not ask it. So I'm going to ask it. What do you do when you realize that the kid doesn't have any problem and it's the parent who has the problem and they need therapy?
You'll be surprised how many times that's the case, right? Like the child is absolutely fine. Very often I don't stop therapy with the child. I continue. I let them know that, hey, like, this is something that is out of your control, but I'm going to need to talk to your parents about this. And I'm going to tell them this, that they need therapy or whatever. And of course, they're going to be very worried. They're like, no, my parents will never listen to you. I'm like, but if they've sent you to therapy, that's only fair that they go to therapy. So then I try to put it across to the parents in such a way that you also need to learn ways to handle the child. And that'll happen when you go for couples therapy. And then I refer them to a therapist that I know so that I can tell them give them the background, give them the history, and be like, okay, please go. And of course, when they go to therapy, if they're going with an open mind, at some point they're going to recognize that this is an issue. So I've seen it work very, very rarely, but it does happen.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you put the child's, wellness in perspective, then maybe
Yeah.
they would do it. Okay. That
Yeah.
makes.
Then they'll be like, oh, I'm doing this for my child. I'm not a problem, but I need to work with my child. So I'm going to, so then they're doing it. But if I tell
Okay.
them, no, you have a problem, you need to go, they'll be like, no, I'm also not coming. My child is also not coming. Nobody's getting therapy. So I'm like, no, no, no. We will continue therapy. You also go to therapy. Then we'll see.
Okay. See,
So,
it's a very tight balancing act as a therapist, and you have to build rapport with your client on the first session. You have to handle all their well-meaning relatives. You are taking in a lot more information from the client. As a young therapist, I mean, I'm not a young therapist, but the listeners are. So, how do we keep our own mental health into consideration? What do you do?
I think taking breaks is very, very important. That's the most important thing ever, right? Because it's very easy to get involved in your clients' lives and be so involved in what is going on for them and how to show up and all of that. And I think as a therapist in full time practice, it's a lot more easier to disconnect from work and do other things. But if any of the people who are listening are going to be working in a school or in a college, then the disconnect is a lot more difficult because you're going to run into your clients a lot more. Not only in session, you're going to see them in classes. If you're in schools, they're going to give you like substitution classes, they're going to give you examination duties and all of that. So your interaction with your clients is going to be multifaceted. But as a therapist who's only a therapist, you don't have to do that. Like you see them in session, then you're done. But in another setting, that's not the case. So taking a break is very, very important. And differentiating between your personal life and your work life is also very important. Some simple things that help is I have two different numbers. One work number, one personal number. So I know that I'm not going to be using my work number during holidays or weekends or things like that. Or my social media. There's a work profile, there's a personal profile, and they're two very different things. And as a therapist, it's something that you need to be mindful about what you're posting, especially if you have a public account, because clients are going to see it. Clients are going to bring it up. Clients are, if they see you on social media, they're going to follow you. Or they are at least going to go through your profile, even if not follow you. And they're going to, and it is going to build a bias in their head.
Yeah.
So we need to be mindful. Unfortunately, we don't have the freedom to be like, oh, I'm going to post whatever I want to post. No. And unless that's the brand that you're building. I don't know if all of you know, like there's someone on Instagram called the Awkward Goat. I don't know her real name
Yes,
because
I know she's there in Instagram also and in LinkedIn also.
huh.
I forgot her
So
name. Yeah.
yeah, even I don't remember her name. I just know her as Awkward Goat.
Mm.
Yeah, like her posting style is very different from my posting style. Like I before I have to post something personal on my work profile, I think 100 times I'm like, do I really want to post this? Do I, should I say something? Should I not? But when I see her posting, I feel like I should be like that because she's a lot more vocal, a lot more transparent, and it works. But for other people, that might not be the situation. Like I know a lot of therapists don't even have a work profile. So those are things that I think we need to build. So these are different things that you can do. And another thing that also helps is have a routine for ending your work day, like whether it's getting a cup of coffee or doing some stretches or for me, obviously, it's driving home because it's like an hour's drive. So it's a great time to disconnect because I'm listening to music, I'm listening to podcast, or I'm watching something. Well, not watching because I'm driving, but listening to something and things like that. And that'll go a long way in helping you move from a work mindset to your personal mindset. So, and not taking too much on your plate, like 5, 6 sessions a day. Like, I know therapists do 8 sessions, 9 sessions a day. Like, that's horrible. Like, by the end of the day, like 6, 7 sessions, you're burnt out. Clients are not getting the best of you. And those are also the clients who come back saying, I had a horrible experience with my therapist. For no fault of the therapist, because therapists would have wanted to show up. But if you've had 6 sessions a day, the 7th one is obviously not going to get the best of you. So things like that would help.
So a similar question from the participants. Is there ever a situation where the therapist should mirror the attitude or towards the client for a certain experience or situation to validate how they feel? Or is it necessary to be effectively neutral even when you are validating the feelings? So basically, how far do you go to mirror or say yes to what they are saying to make them feel validated? Is that important?
I mean, validation, yes. But let's say we're working on someone with anger issues. And they got angry at a family event because someone said something horrible and mean, or they committed on their body or whatever, and they got angry. The anger is completely valid, right? But let's say they got so angry that they ended up yelling at someone or even hit someone. You can't validate that and say, oh yeah, it was right that you hit someone and you got angry. No. So when you tell them, of course, like, you got angry, that's valid because what the other person said was not okay. But you responding with violence is not making the situation better. So what are other ways that we can learn to cope with anger? Right? So of course, you validate the feeling, you validate the emotion, you validate what is going on for them. But if it means that they are harming themselves or they are harming another person as a result of those feelings and emotions, then it's not okay. Right? Like someone said, your emotion is okay, but the way you emote it is not okay. So then that is something. So then, of course, if they're coming to you to work on anger, and then they come back and say, oh, I did something horrible in my anger, you can't be like, it's okay. Like, no, that's what you need to work on. You need to work on them not making decisions or having actions that have repercussions for them because they lost their cool for a minute. So yeah, mirroring them in terms of their voice, in terms of their posture, in terms of the words that they're using. Those are things that you can, of course, do because it helps build rapport, it helps make them feel seen and heard and all of that. But validating them also needs to come with a limitation. Like I saw on Instagram recently about how it's a trend, right? Like the worst person you know is going to therapy and the therapist is validating them and the therapist thinks that they're amazing, something like that. But I've seen a lot of people questioning that trend because in therapy, you don't get just validation, right? Like you don't just get therapy say, yeah, correct, very good, good job. No, like when they're not doing things, when they're not following their routine, or when they're not holding up the promises they've made to themselves or to somebody, you sort of help them understand why it's important, why they need to do it, and how can they get there. So that is also the work, not just validating people.
Okay. Again, questions from participants. There are a lot of questions, and I'm so glad that they have been asking a lot of questions. I have completely veered off from what I wanted to ask, and I have just been doing only, participants' questions. So great job from all of you here. Thank you. So how do you build a sense of judgment? That is, what to say, what not to say as a counselor or a therapist? What is your journey, and how can I, me included as an undergrad student, learn the same? How do I do that?
There are a couple of things for this, right? Like one, unconditional positive regard has to be your basic foundation, right? Like whatever you say to your client, say it with love, say it with concern, say it with their well-being in mind, right? That is one thing. And Second, sometimes you don't know what to say. It's okay. You can tell them that I cannot imagine what that feels like or what that must be like because I have never been through it. And that's okay. Sometimes silence is the biggest tool in therapy. You don't have to say anything, just sit with it. That doesn't mean all the time you just sit and, let the client sit in silence. No, but you need to learn when to use it. Not every time you need to use your words, but it comes with practice. Like for me, I'm a very cognitive based therapist, right? Very cognitive or humanistic approach. But I've had people who need existential work or who need psychoanalytic work, and that is not my forte. And I let them know. I let them know that, hey, this is not something that I work well with. So it is something that I struggle with. So you can let me know if this is not working for you. I can refer you to somebody. And so that is something that happens. And CBT doesn't always work with everybody. And that is something that as therapists, we also need to learn that our approach doesn't work for all clients, right? They need to go to another therapist. So learning when to also end therapy or terminate and refer them to another therapist is also an important skill to have. And learning what to say comes with practice. And I mean, you're not going to say the most random thing. Like if clients are telling you about how someone treated them badly, like, I mean, I'm going to assume that everyone's trained enough to be like, oh, that sucks. You shouldn't have been like, no, you're not going to say that, right? Like you are going to say, oh, that's horrible. I'm sorry you had to go through that. And sort of, explain, get them to talk about what was going on for them and all of that. So those are basic things you already know. And I really think that if you've already picked this profession to that, if you've already picked this as a profession, then you're already an empathetic person. You already know a lot of things to say. You just need to hone those skills a little bit and you trust yourself, right? Like how you're going to respond to your friends may not be the same way that you're going to respond to your clients. But I truly believe that not everybody chooses to be a psychologist. Not like just like not everybody chooses to be a nurse or a teacher. So if you've chose, like for some people, it's not a choice. Okay, they're forced to be a teacher or they're forced to be a nurse. And when you go to school or you go to a hospital, you just know that these are not the people who are here out of their own choice. And you don't want to be treated by them because they're poking you unnecessarily and they're treating you badly. And you're like, I never want to interact with this nurse ever again. But there are some people who truly are living their calling, right? Of course, the training and the experience definitely goes a long way, but it's also who they intrinsically are. And I think as therapists, that's also true. It's not something that people just randomly choose one day. No. Because I know that a lot of people from my batch who did masters, like we were a class of 60, and about 20 of us are practicing therapists. The rest of them are doing research, the rest of them are working in corporate sectors, the rest of them are teachers, and they've moved on to other things because as they've studied, they realized this is not it. This is not what I want to do. So I hope that the people who've chosen to do this are empathetic enough to know how to carry the conversation forward. Sure, the skills and the tools are other things that you will learn, but basic empathy you're going to have for yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Sorry, there is a follow-up about the anger and hitting someone part of question that you had asked. Somebody is asking, so do you make them feel like you understand why they did it? That is why they hit somebody. Or are you strictly supposed to make it clear that the action is unacceptable from the very beginning? That is, do you kind of not validate but understand why they did it and then say this is unacceptable, or do you say this is acceptable, you cannot hit others, period? What do you do? It's again fine
The
line.
second option doesn't make us very different from their parents, no? Like parents also are very famous for laying down the rules with no explanation. But as a therapist, we have the privilege and the freedom to say, I get it. Like if I was in your place, I would have wanted to hit them as well. But we are above that. We are beyond that. And we choose to do better. And of course, they're not going to immediately change, because if that's what they like, for example, like I don't work with kids, but I know of a therapist who works with children. And I know that when they work with like 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and they tell them you can't hit your sibling when they take your fruit or your toy from you, like it's going to take some time for them to apply that information. But as adults, we have a lot more information grasping ability, and we know, like, okay, first time I hit somebody, and obviously there would have been backlash, right? Like, how can you slap me? How can you be trying to serve people? There's going to be so many other things. And they're, hopefully, if they're willing and open to working on themselves, they're going to start practicing self-control. If they're being triggered by someone and you know that, this was not okay, their mom said something, their sister said something, and so they got upset, then of course you can validate them and say, okay, yeah, that was horrible. They shouldn't have said that, but they did, and you got upset, and I get that. But now we're working on it. So what are other ways that you can address this? You can walk away. You can say that I no longer want to talk to you right now because I'm upset and you're saying things that make me feel horrible, so I am leaving. Or you can tell them that this is not acceptable and not make further contact, set a better boundary with them, because then so you're giving them other coping mechanisms. Right now their coping mechanism is that I'm angry, I'm going to hit them back, because they don't have another coping mechanism. But you're also giving them other coping mechanisms. But if they have been, let's say, a child of a narcissistic parent, they've been abused their entire lives, so they're not going to be able to draw a boundary immediately. They need to build a lot of self-confidence. They need to build a lot of self-esteem. They need to learn to trust themselves. And only then will boundaries start happening. So you need to do the groundwork for the result to be seen. So sure, there might be 3 more times they come back and tell you, my dad yelled at me, so I cut myself, or something happened, so I ended up hitting somebody. Sure, it's okay.
All right.
What next?
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You're not their parents, you are their therapist. That is a good motto to remember. The theoretical knowledge and the practical aspect of therapy are very different. Again, I'm reading from the chat. Thus, as a budding psychologist, how did you keep upskilling yourself? Because initially one is exploring different areas and understanding their area of expertise. So what did you do?
I wanted to say a lot of reading, but no, I didn't. I attended a lot of workshops because I'm a better listener than a reader of theory. And I think when I graduated 10 years ago, 8 years ago, yeah, whenever that was.
Long time ago, let's just
Yeah,
say,
long time ago.
no years.
There were not many workshops. Like we really had to struggle to find workshops because people were not doing it. And when they did it, they were so expensive. But now I think the good thing that I see is that there are so many organizations that are, creating workshops, that are creating resources for you to learn, certifications that you can do. There's art therapy certification, there's trauma certification, there's somatic work, so many things that you can learn, which are so much more accessible. Of course, they are a little expensive, I can imagine, on a student's budget. But I think they're a great investment, especially if you find the right organization to get it from. It would be a great way to upskill.
Okay. So that is a good point for me to say, as part of ZenCircle, sponsored by Zensible, we do a lot of webinars just like this, and we get a lot of experts, just like Delph, and you can learn from these webinars. These webinars are always free because we want to promote good practices among practicing and aspiring therapists. So join this WhatsApp group. I have just pasted the group link here. You'll get to know about the next session. So please do join our WhatsApp group. We have 1 minute, and I am really keen to ask you the question which actually led us having this webinar. When I met you last time, you told me about how in an offline setting, how the room needs to be, how one of your client asked for a certain change. So to establish trust with the client, what sort of room do you need to have, especially in an offline setting? And in an online setting, do you ask your clients to keep some stuff next to them to help them feel calmer?
Honestly, I think having an office with all of the things that are good in a therapy session is a privilege, right? Because as a therapist at Heart It Out, I have access to beautiful rooms, beautiful couches, beautiful chairs, tissue boxes, water bottles, people to help clients, and all of that. And of course, it benefits therapy in a great way, right? And it is great. And when clients come, they're very used to a particular room that they've been in. Or, if curtains have changed, they have interior decoration advice to give me. Or if something has changed, then they have like more information to give me and say, you should buy it from Amazon. It's available. I'll send you a link and all of that, which is great. It really helps. But as a school counselor, I had half a corridor as my therapy space, and therapy still happened. Right? And there was nothing. I had a table, I had a chair, client had a chair. If client's friend was going to come, I'd ask them to get a chair from outside. And of course, the privacy was horrible because we were sitting in a corridor and people would keep walking up and down. But the work still happened. So, sure, having an office and having it in a certain way definitely helps, but it is not the most important part of therapy. Like I said, it's additional. The most important part of therapy is the therapist and the therapeutic alliance. Like that, if you can manage in any space, then you're going to have a decent therapist experience. Of course, there are going to be clients who are going to be like, oh, the blue couch is far worse than the gray couch. And, like this chair is too hard and it's not working out and whatever else. But they're going to learn to adapt. Like for example, I've had students who I used to see when I was in school as a school counselor. And then they saw me in between when I was freelancing and I was, figuring stuff out. Then all of my sessions were online. So they had no space to come see me offline. Now they come to Heart It Out. And they're like, wow, what is this magical thing you have? And they're also constantly comparing, like, do you remember the room that we had in school? Like, you barely had anything. So it really doesn't matter. Of course, they feel great because they have a full couch to lie down on and not a plastic chair where they have to like manage. But it's fine. And clients also can be very entitled. Like I mean, you've been to Heart It Out. The rest of you want to visit Heart It Out, please do. We've got new flooring done, and it happened recently. And there have been clients who are older than the flooring. So when they came and they saw the flooring done, and we started doing it room by room, right? Like we didn't do it all at once. So they were very upset that their room hadn't gotten the new flooring. They were like, why is it there in the hall? Why is it there in the reception area and not here? And I'm like,
If I
slowly.
was the client, I would feel like that as well, because that flooring is so amazing. I love it.
So I'm like, slowly we'll get there. They're like, yeah, but why? Why have they done it only there and not here? I'm like, okay, we'll get there.
I mean, somebody told me, true story, that coming to Heart It Out itself is like a therapy. The place itself is therapeutic. So yeah, there's a place matters, but the counselor also matters, and your
Yes.
rapport also matters. So if I have missed any of your questions, I'm really sorry. But with Delph, it's just a treasure trove of information, and we couldn't, go through everything. But thank you so much for all of your questions. And Delph, you were amazing. Thank you so much for patiently answering so much of our questions. I'm sure we will have you back on in one of our subsequent webinars. Thank you for patiently answering, and see you